Preface The Metamorphosis is a novella by Franz Kafka, first published in 1915. It has been cited as one of the seminal works of fiction of 20th century and is studied in colleges and universities across the Western world. The story begins with a traveling salesman, Roger Samsa, waking to find himself transformed, metamorphosed into a large, monstrous insect like creature. The cause of Samsa's transformation is never revealed, and Kafka's never did give an explanation. The rest of Kafka's novel deals with Gregor's attempts to adjust his new condition, and he deals with being burdensome to his parents and sister, who are repulsed by the horrible, verminous creature Gregor has become. Kafka wrote The Metamorphosis in 1912, the year he felt his creativity finally taking a definite form. It was one of very few works Kafka was to publish in his lifetime. In 1930, he turned down an offer to publish the story, possibly because he was saving it for a book he was planning called Sons. A year later, he sent the book to a friend who was prevented from publishing it by his conservative editors. Finally, the Metamorphosis appeared in print in 1915 after Kafka asked a publisher to put it out in a very unusual display of concern for publication. The writing process on this novel was laborious, taking 3 weeks in November and December, and the final product turned out to be longest work Kafka ever completed in his life. The novel is clearly highly autobiographical on its content. To shed some light on the driving themes, one should make a brief examination of Kafka's life, his beliefs, and his ideas on writing. The actual condition of his life, especially his family's life, are certainly a model for the family interaction of the novel, and the form of the story comes from Kafka's watching of a play. Kafka's view of humanity found their origin in his idiosyncratic religious views, lying somewhere outside the mainstream of Judaism. Speaking with his friends Max Brod, Kafka once explained that he thought human beings were God's nihilistic thoughts. Brod asked whether there were hope elsewhere in the universe. To this, Kafka replied, "Plenty of hope for God, only not for us." This vision of human being trapped a hopeless world never leaves Kafka's writing, and it is represented in the Metamorphosis, where Gregor's only option in the end is to die. Ironically, the story ends on an optimistic note as the family puts itself back together. Yet, after having written the story, Kafka criticizes its imperfections, reserving his harshest remark for the ending and insisting that it was unreadable. The style of the book optimized Kafka's writing. It was common for Kafka to present an impossible situation, such as a man's transformation into an insect, and develop the story from there with perfect realism and intense attention to detail. The style seems to ground the story in reality, cutting off any possibility of its having been a dream. And yet, the story itself is an impossible occurrence. As a result, the reader is forced to look for deeper meaning within the story. The idea of writing about an insect appears in Kafka's writing as early as 1907. While he held on to his idealism with regard to the writing process, he imagined his body moving around the world while his true writing self remained behind in the form of a beautiful beetle. This imagine changed drastically in 1912. In September, Kafka wrote The Judgment, possibly his most autobiographical story ever, in a single sitting. He wrote in his diary that the writing flowed smoothly and that this is the only true way to write, with a complete opening out of the body and soul. Reading the proofs for the story a little later, Kafka found himself disappointed by the imperfections in the story. It was as if he had let out the story in a perfect form, but now realized that it was covered with filth and slime. Writing when it springs from within is like giving birth, and the child is covered in mucus. The insect Kafka's metaphor for his writing, self removed from the everyday world, was no longer a beautiful thing, but a repulsive and flirty one. This is exactly the image he gave us in the Metamorphosis. This idea had to take some form and found it in a Yildiz play, Gordon's The Savage One. Kafka wrote about the play extensively in his diaries, and it is clear that he used the play as a model for his story. Close parallels between the two abound. All the characters of Kafka's story find their origins in the savage one. Rigger's counterpart in the play is the idiot son who is unable to communicate with his family and stays locked in his room for fear of his father. The dominant symbol of the story also reflect those of Gordon's play. Like a play, the metamorphosis takes place entirely in a small rooms like stage sets, and the action builds through discrete episodes, building toward a climax. Even the theme is similar. The savage one, his character, explains and that when one pursues material means a savage awaken within us and forces us to oppose the laws of humanity. And in idea, Kafka takes quite literally in his own work. The Metamorphosis, as proposed earlier, is an autobiographical piece of writing, and we find that parts of the story reflect Kafka's own life. It is well known that Kafka felt like an insect in his father's authoritative presence and even developed a stammer while speaking to him. Gregor likewise covered in fear of his father, who finds him repulsive and attracts him in every turn. Kafka even wrote that he was pleased with the similarity of Samsa's name to his own. Kafka's mother, like her alter ego of the story, is silently behind her husband's presence. Out of a sense of duty to his parents and because he needed money for his planned marriage, Kafka was forced to take an office job he did not enjoy. Furthermore, his family insisted that he needed to spend his afternoon in the office. Kafka himself felt that his presence at the office was pointless, but it took up enough time that he would not be able to write, alienating him from his creativity needs. Kafka had been very close to his sister, Olta, and she usually understood him. In this despite, however, even she turned against him in insisting he stay at the office in the afternoons. Kafka felt that she had betrayed him, and that night he actually contemplated suicide. This happened in November, less than 2 months later. In Kafka's writing, Rigerius' sister betrayed him by insisting that the family must get rid of him. None of these sources for the novel, however, can provide one with a complete understanding of the metamorphosis. It is not a straight autobiography, nor it a rewrite of a play or a story aimed only at showing Kafka's disillusionment with writing. These elements are simply the raw materials that Kafka skillfully puts together in his own style, creating a meaning that is far too mysterious to be accounted for simply.